she remarked. 5 years and you still couldn't manage the ring I desire while grinning for the snapshots. I replied, fortunately, I no longer need to. When she lifted the lid of the velvet case I pushed across the table, her grin dissolved. For 5 years, I functioned under the belief that my girlfriend Chloe and I were aligned as partners. I assumed we were constructing a future piece by piece, a bond rooted in common objectives and reciprocal regard. I have now discovered that we were never aligned at all. I was erecting a home and she was merely residing in it, griping that it wasn't a palace. I am an engineer. My thoughts operate in blueprints, calculations, and extended forecasts. I avoid rash choices, particularly regarding finances. When Chloe and I first became committed, we discussed our path ahead. A residence, economic security, and ultimately wedlock. She displayed an image of her ideal engagement band, an outrageously oversized gem from a luxury retailer, carrying a cost that could purchase a solid vehicle. I didn't react. I simply viewed it as another extended endeavor. I established a dedicated savings account and began systematically depositing funds. But I wasn't solely accumulating for a band. I was accumulating for an existence. Every dollar allocated to the band reserve was paired with a dollar directed to a resident's initial payment reserve. I aimed to present her the band, but I also aimed to present us a dwelling. It was a gradual, regimented procedure. For 5 years, I operated an aging vehicle, prepared my own midday meals, and passed on costly outings with guys, all while supporting a highly pleasant way of life for the pair of us in a flat that I covered. Chloe, conversely, is an individual who exists in the present. Her realm is online platforms, midday meals with companions, and the ongoing exhausting display of seeming casually wealthy. She interpreted my monetary restraint not as a dedication for our tomorrow, but as an individual shortcoming. She interpreted it as me being stingy. Her tolerance had been diminishing over the past year. The suggestions about becoming engaged grew less indirect, and her remarks about my expenditure patterns became more sharp. The tipping point arrived on the evening of our 5th milestone. I had arranged a unique meal at an upscale eatery with 2 other pairs, our nearest allies. It was intended to be a tribute to our path together. In my pocket, I carried a tiny, dark velvet case. The intention was to suggest later that night, in a secluded and significant spot, following the meal. I had at last achieved it. I had accumulated sufficient for a 20% initial payment on a reasonable dwelling in a solid area, and 2 weeks earlier, I had made the last installment on the precise 3-carat band she had desired. The endeavor was finished. I was prepared. The meal began positively. We selected a fine container of vino. We chuckled. We reflected. Then her companion Jenna glanced at her with a crafty grin. So, Chloe, she stated, her tone sufficient for the entire group to catch. 5 years, that is an extended period. Is Kevin ever going to secure a band on it? Chloe released a sharp, dramatic chuckle. She bent over to position for an image another ally was capturing, ensuring her grin was flawless for the online post. Then she gazed at me, her gaze filled with an odd, vivid harshness, and uttered the phrases that exploded our whole tomorrow. 5 years, and he still couldn't manage the band I desire. Perhaps by year 10, correct? Darling? The group fell silent. Her allies snickered uneasily. My allies gazed at me with faces of utter astonishment. It wasn't a jest. It was a communal humiliation, a rejection of 5 years of my dedication, presented with a flawless grin for an online image. In that soul-savage instant, I understood the band wasn't an emblem of our devotion to her. It was a prize. It was a prestige emblem she required to confirm her own value. And she was furious that I hadn't obtained it for her swiftly enough. The individual I was 5 minutes before would have been pained, mortified. He would have attempted to justify himself. But that individual was vanished. In his stead was another, someone chilled and lucid and concluded. The engineer in my mind assumed control, assessed the factors, and identified only one rational outcome. The endeavor had been terminated. I grinned back at her, a serene, effortless grin that didn't extend to my eyes. Fortunately, I stated, my tone completely steady. I no longer need to. Her grin wavered. The allies glanced to and fro between us, bewildered. Before she could reply, I extended into my pocket and retrieved the tiny, dark velvet case. Her gaze brightened. A surge of absolute, victorious ease swept over her expression. She believed this was the moment. She believed I was about to suggest, to disprove her before all, to grant her the triumph she so urgently sought. I didn't descend on one knee. I simply remained seated, gazed her in the eye, and pushed the case across the sleek surface. Joyful milestone, Chloe, I stated. She lifted the case with quivering, anxious digits. And then her victorious grin disappeared, substituted by a facade of astonished, terrified bewilderment. Because within that case there was no 3-carat gem. There was no band whatsoever. There was merely a lone, precisely creased sheet of paper. She gradually uncreased it. I didn't require seeing her expression to recognize her look. I had already shifted my seat back, risen, and was proceeding toward the restaurant's departure. The contents of that sheet were my ultimate statements in this 5-year extended discussion. And I was no longer at the group. Update 1. The stroll from that eatery to my vehicle seemed like the initial strides of a liberated individual. My device began vibrating before I even ignited the motor. But I simply placed it on the adjacent seat and departed. I didn't return to the flat. I headed to my workplace, a calm, barren space where I could reflect. The vibrating from my device was unceasing. I eventually retrieved it. Numerous overlooked calls from Chloe and her allies. A series of messages, each more agitated than the previous. What was that? What was on that sheet? Kevin, this isn't amusing. Return here. You utterly destroyed my milestone. How could you be so harsh? I didn't respond. I simply accessed my portable computer and began disentangling the chaos of an existence I had constructed around her. For those of you curious, what was on that sheet inside the velvet case? It wasn't a note. It was an invoice. It was a precisely arranged, detailed roster I had output in my workplace that afternoon, right before heading to the gem specialist to collect her band. I had an abrupt, shadowy foresight that the night might not proceed as intended, and I readied a backup. The roster stated, topic, 5-year milestone. Monetary assessment. Item 1, initial payment on your firm vehicle. 2022 model year, $5,000. Item 2, your portion of getaway to Italy. Summer 2023, $3,850. Item 3, your remaining credit line balance settled completely. Winter 2024, $7,200. Item 4, various luxury purses and footwear. Past 24 months, roughly $8,500. Item 5, support for your ladies' excursions. Las Vegas, Miami, $2,500. Total supports to individual way of life reserve, 2021 to 2025, $27,150. And at the base, a last straightforward phrase. Expense of requested engagement band, $26,500. Appreciate assisting me understand I already executed the commitment. The yields were just unsatisfactory. That was all. No sentiment, just chilled, solid figures. The figures narrated a tale that she couldn't dispute. The funds she had been awaiting for me to expend on her band had in reality already been expended on her. I arrived at the flat late that night to a vacant space. She had obviously departed to an ally's location. The initial action I took was alter the locks. The following morning, I was at the financial institution when it opened. I shut our shared savings account, the one for the resident's initial payment, and transferred the assets into a fresh individual account. I terminated her additional credit line. She appeared around midday that day, her face ashen and her eyes swollen. Her key naturally didn't function. She began striking the door. I allowed her to remain there for a period before I opened it. You have 5 minutes to clarify yourself, she stated, her tone quivering with fury. I don't require 5 minutes, I stated, resting against the doorframe. That sheet clarified everything. We are finished, Chloe. You are ending with me? Over a prank after 5 years? Yes, I stated, because it wasn't a prank. It was a bill. You issued me a bill for your attachment, and I have determined the cost is excessive. You perceive me as nothing more than a financial source, a method to an objective. The issue for you is this financial source is now shut. But our existence, my belongings, my vehicle, she faltered. This is my flat, Chloe. The agreement is in my name. The vehicle is also in my name. I recommend you begin preparing for both. You have 1 week to remove your belongings from my residence. Her fury collapsed into urgency. But I can't manage the vehicle installments. I can't manage a fresh flat. That appears like an individual monetary issue, I stated. You should likely begin crafting a calculation sheet. I find them quite useful. I shut the door on her astonished expression. The week that ensued was a contest of determination. She attempted all. She dispatched her allies to converse with me. She had her mother contact me, who informed me I was shattering her daughter's spirit. I courteously informed her mother that her daughter's spirit appeared to be situated in a gem retailer showcase, and that I was no longer curious in making installments on it. During that week, I did something I had been delaying. I headed to the secure in my storage and extracted the actual band. It was precisely what she desired. 3 carats, impeccable quality, placed in a basic platinum strip. It was stunning, and it seemed like a tainted item in my palm. It was a tribute to a deception. I had completed my portion of the agreement, but she had neglected to complete hers. She had neglected to be an ally. At the week's conclusion, she had still not prepared any plans to relocate her belongings. She believed I was pretending. On the last day, I had a relocation firm expertly bundle every item that pertained to her. They transported it all to her parents' residence, where I knew she would need to go. That night, I was solitary in my flat, encircled by the vacant areas she used to fill. It seemed pure. It seemed peaceful. I rested on my sofa and gazed at the engagement band, positioned on the low table. I experienced a deep feeling of sorrow, not for her, but for the 5 years I had devoted on an endeavor that was condemned from the beginning. But I also experienced a feeling of liberation. I no longer had to accumulate for a band I didn't wish to present, for a woman I no longer admired. The endeavor was concluded, and all the resources were mine once more. Final update: it has been 6 months since the evening of our 5th milestone meal. The procedure of advancing has been like restoring an aged dwelling. You must remove all the decayed timber and defective connections before you can construct something fresh and sturdy. Chloe's existence, from what I have learned, has experienced a destruction of its own. Her parents, after I serenely described the monetary circumstances to them and displayed the financial records, were not as encouraging of their daughter as she had anticipated. They permitted her to remain with them, but they clarified that she was required to secure employment and cover her own path. Her profession in property had been more of a pastime supported by me. Without the costly vehicle and the luxury attire, she discovered it challenging to draw the premium customers she was accustomed to. She had to dispose of the vehicle to settle her obligations. Last I learned, she was employed as a greeter at the exact eatery where our bond had concluded. Her allies, the ones who chuckled at her prank, gradually vanished. It turns out, their devotion was directly related to my readiness to cover the bill. The most notable occurrence, however, was what I did with the band. I couldn't force myself to dispose of it. It seemed incorrect, like gaining from a defeat. I returned to the aged, serene gem specialist who had tailor-made it for me. I recounted the entire tale. He was a gentle man in his 70s, and he simply nodded mournfully, as if he had heard 100 comparable accounts. I inquired if he could perform something for me. I had him extract the large, 3-carat gem from the mount. Then I had him take the platinum from the strip, dissolve it, and shape it into something else, a basic, plain currency holder. It was emblematic. The substance that was intended to link me to an existence of anticipation was now restructured to contain the results of my own efforts. As for the gem, I had it placed into a basic, graceful pendant. Not for anyone else. For my sister. For her 40th celebration. I presented it to her. She had been my greatest advocate through all of this, and I wanted her to possess something lovely with no conditions. With my tomorrow now my own, I executed a significant existence shift. I took the funds I had accumulated for the resident's initial payment, and I committed it in myself. I departed my reliable but unsatisfying engineering position and launched my own advisory company, focusing on a specific sector of my discipline I was enthusiastic about. It was a gamble, but for the first time I wasn't fearful to accept one. 2 months prior, my new company secured its initial large agreement. To market, I ventured to a modest, understated eatery alone. It was there that I encountered Kate. She was my attendant. She was a lone parent, laboring 2 positions to fund her nursing education. She was intelligent, humorous, and possessed a kindness and a durability that I found extremely appealing. We conversed for an extended period that night. She wasn't swayed by what I did professionally, or how much I earned. She was swayed by the fact that I had the bravery to begin anew. We have been seeing each other ever since. It is a distinct type of bond. It is founded on common encounters and reciprocal admiration, not monetary exchanges. We divide the costs, we prepare evening meals together, we discuss our tomorrows, and they seem like a joint endeavor, not a roster of requirements. The last, unforeseen segment of this tale occurred last week. Kate and I were at a collection event for a nearby medical center. It was a relaxed open-air gathering. I spotted Chloe there. She wasn't laboring. She was on an outing with a man who appeared to be at least 30 years senior to her. A man who was sporting a timepiece that exceeded the cost of my initial vehicle. She appeared unhappy, her grin as artificial and fragile as it had been on our milestone night. She noticed me. Her gaze promptly went to Kate, assessing her, and then to my arm, likely searching for a costly timepiece. Then her sight dropped on something in my grasp. I was settling for a set of beverages, and I extracted my currency holder to obtain some paper. The basic, graceful platinum currency holder. She identified the luster of the material. I witnessed the precise instant of identification in her gaze. The color emptied from her face. She understood precisely what she was observing. She was observing the dissolved remnants of her ideal band, now being utilized to secure $20 notes for a set of Alesh at a benevolence gathering. It was the supreme declaration that everything she deemed vital, the band, the prestige, the platinum strip, had been altered into something functional, beneficial, and entirely under my authority. She shifted away rapidly, drawing her senior, affluent companion in the reverse path. I glanced over at Kate, who was chuckling with one of her classmates from nursing education. I approached and passed her a beverage. She grinned at me, a genuine grin, one that extended to her eyes. In that instant, encircled by the noises of a regional group and decent individuals, I understood I was wealthier than I had ever been. I had finally discovered something invaluable, and it had absolutely nothing to do with a band.